has been a great conference. Some of the work that I will talk about was started in 1974, and now a lot of people are interested in phase coherence and resonance and brain synchrony, and they weren't particularly interested at that time. Stan Krippner supported it. He was my master teacher. Elizabeth Russell, our regular San Francisco group that's here. It's like old times, and it's really fun. One of the things that has fascinated me about this particular conference is that a lot of different theories have been presented, a lot of different ideas, and we are still getting along really well with it, even if we disagree. But one of the nice things about that is that we start to think, since nobody really knows what's going on, and I'm not a physicist for sure, is that we start to talk, we might as well use the terms as metaphor and admit it up front. I spent quite a bit of time listening to Elizabeth and Paul Sarag talking about multidimensional universe. It appealed to me, and Edgar Mitchell doesn't seem to approve of it. Doesn't matter to me. I still like the term, it's a good metaphor. It's a metaphor because there's so much of our own personalities that are not always aware of what's going on. We do step into these other realms and have a chance to see other things. So I'm still going to use multidimensional, and I really enjoyed Edgar's talk, but I think there are. So but if he has used metaphors, which I have to also acknowledge, a number of people have still used the metaphor of right brain, left brain, as though it had to do with analytical versus intuitive thinking. And of all the years I've spent looking at the EEG, it just is not accurate. They're one of the few things that came out of that research, the early research in which became this wonderful metaphor of, oh, you're a right brain person, oh no, I'm a left brain person, is that one side keeps relatively better track of time, and the other side keeps relatively better track of space. But it doesn't have to do, right brain isn't exclusive for intuition. As a matter of fact, when you synchronize your brain waves from both sides, through that pure wave form, you have a chance to integrate your verbals with your nonverbals. And intuition and, oh, gosh, now I remember, comes out of that integration. So I used to sort of cringe when I heard somebody say, well, I'm a right brain person, or, well, I've been left brain all my life, and so on. No, language is global. Your words are over here for expressing that language. And there's a lot of duplication on both sides, and I would like, after 30 years, finally, to see the people who use those terms, which everybody understands, to say, yes, it's a metaphor, because that's really all it is. And so that's why I'm admitting that if I use multidimensional at this point, because the physicists haven't decided, it's a metaphor. I like it. My history is so much different than any of the folks that I've seen here. I was really fascinated to hear your first speaker, Gabrielle, talk about the government remote viewing from a historical point of view. Now, I interacted with SRI when Uri Geller came in 1973, but there's another history. We could say we were under government supervision. We were so far under that we didn't want them to know about it. and so I'd like to show a very part of a film that we made in 1965, Well, I made it in 63, but we finally finished it in 65. It won the Film as Art Award at the San Francisco International Film Festival. But I'm only going to show you a short section because it's the first time that I became aware of the terms of moving beyond space and time. I grew up in a family that had a number of psychic experiences, although mostly among the women, the men kind of scoffed, but we didn't make a big thing of it. You know, as I mentioned to some other people, I have 3 sisters, there's no boys in the family, and my mother would call up and say, I've had morning sickness for 2 weeks, which one of you is pregnant? You know, those things, it's just one of the things that we shared. But when I became enormously interested in the subject was when my grandfather, who had lived on a ranch in Wabasca, and I was there part of the time with him. For those of you who are in Las Vegas, you may have seen Wabasca on the map. It doesn't really exist anymore. We had a one-room school, and you know, it's way out there. And I was in San Francisco, it was 45 years ago, and I suddenly became aware of my grandfather's presence. It turns out, I put through a lot of phone calls, turns out that he had died in Reno, and he came to tell me. So by the time I got all the phone calls and find out where he had gone and which hospital and so on, my mother came on the line and she said, how did you know to call at this moment? And I couldn't say Grandpa told me. I don't know what to say. But after that, I realized that I could just sit there and let him talk to me. And I learned that later on, and a number of people who've crossed over do have quite a few things to say before they leave and graduate from our school. So I couldn't study it at that time. I'm raising babies. My background is in art. I was doing murals in San Francisco, and my husband and I had a silkscreen process business. And my background, then I went back, after the divorce, I went back to school and got a degree teaching art. And that's when I encountered the need to do this film. So if we could have the lights out, it's a very short section. I've decided to take away from the statistics here for a minute, just to remind people of something else. Oh dear, I guess I'm supposed to do this.
Psychedelic means mind expanding. A psychedelic experience is a voyage inside, a trip into the countless galaxies of your own nervous system. For thousands of years, philosophers and poets have told mankind that there is more inside, that the reality of the external world is only one of millions of realities within the human nervous system. For thousands of years, too, men have studied methods of consciousness expansion, techniques for going out of your mind, beyond your routine ways of experiencing. Chemicals are perhaps the most effective method because the language of the body, the language of the nervous system, is itself biochemical. Another form of direct energy which can produce the psychedelic experience is music. Energy vibrations artfully energized to take us into new dimensions of space, time, and identity.
Whatever works. Does this work? Sounds like it. Very soon the boys put the acid in the Kool-Aid. And I did do a light show for the Grateful Dead at one point. And they really were too loud. And, you know, I'm older. And, but that's sort of where I met Tim Scully. There was one of those acid in the Kool-Aid adventures that Tom Wolfe wrote about, and I was the designated driver doing the light show, so I hadn't had the Kool-Aid, and Tim Scully was doing the electronics, and so he hadn't, and I think we were the only two who hadn't. And so I tried to talk to him at that time about designing something electronic that would show the human aura. We had no idea at that time that we would end up doing it and have it be controlled by brainwaves. But there was so much, the whole idea, of course, of the acid in the Kool-Aid had to do with resonance, had to do with getting people through entrainment with lights, sound, and chemistry, and dancing, to all experience the sense of oneness, the sense of synchrony. And that, from time to time, did happen. It was a very powerful, I remember when Phil Lesh once told me, he said it was the most powerful experience he'd ever had since he first breathed air. I should say the most powerful evolutionary experience. Left out the important word. So when, in 1967, Dr. Joe Kamiya invented alpha brainwave biofeedback. And very soon after that, the Biofeedback Society was born. And since I was in Los Angeles, Dr. Barbara Brown was asking for volunteers. Yes, I will volunteer. And I was most interested. This is
Back to the comfort zone here.
Oh, okay. We can put it in the other pockets and cross over. Thank you.
I'll take that.
Thank you very much. These guys are so sweet. I mean, they've been so helpful. So I volunteered for Dr. Barbara Brown and found out, yes, in spite of having had some Kool-Aid from time to time, that I could still have voluntary control of my brainwaves, and that this was a very powerful revelation to me. When Tim Scully passed through town, I said, gee, Tim, we need toys like this to play with. Of course, she's got a whole room full of equipment. In those days, a PDP-15, which cost $150,000 or more, took up a whole room, and it had 64K memory. But they did wonderful things. So the following year, I found out that Stan Krippner was doing probably the best parapsychology research that was being done anywhere at that time. I haven't heard his name mentioned very much at this conference, but he was doing the dream telepathy work at Maimonides Medical Center in Brooklyn. And so I went there and I hung out there for a while and volunteered for some of his work. He also did some brainwave training. They were looking at single channel, but you know, they'd hook your brainwaves, hook you up to the wall, you know, and have you go to sleep. And if you had to get up and go to the bathroom, they have to come unplug you, take all your electrodes. And then after you have about 4 dreams a night, about 20 minutes long, and before the dream is over, you'd hear this microphone in your room saying, please tell us what's on your mind. And well, I was dreaming about, you know, and you sound really funny. And the next morning, they give you a series of pictures, and you need to pick out which one you think matched your dream. Well, of course, you expect dream symbolism to be involved in this, and it was. But what I didn't expect when later on I was doing awake telepathy experiment, the dream symbolism is still there. And that's part of the fun point. We'll show you some of those afterwards. So after coming back from New York, I was very interested in designing some kind of feedback. And Tim Scully came to me in New York, the winter of 69-70, and he said, here's your toy. And he had developed the first AlphaPhone portable EEG equipment. It was sort of earphones with battery and a little whatever, and you'd hear for the beta fast frequencies, it sounded like sort of a mosquito, and for the alpha, it sounded like sort of a bumblebee, and then gradually you could, learn to do one or the other. And so then when I came back and my parents, I had to move in with my parents, my son was ill, and so I had some time, and Stan Krippner encouraged me to go ahead and design something for feedback. Tim Scully by then had developed the first alpha phone brainwave analyzer, which was a box about this size. Most of the weight was taken up by 4 lantern batteries. And it would analyze, you could still hear the mosquito and the bumblebee, but it also would sort it out between frequency categories. And you could set those as you chose, but the beta usually 13 to 20, which was about the limit of what we could measure, and alpha 8 to 12, and theta 4 to 7. But we didn't, it would measure some delta, but we usually hooked it up to, so that it would register artifact, because when you blink your eyes or move your eyes, it's really the strongest signal, and it would swamp everything else. So the next thing that Tim did was to develop an isolation switch. So we could plug in a radio or lights or whatever and not get electrocuted. And so we had a chance to play with that for quite a while. And so when my son, I was sort of captive audience, since he was having this, recovering from a major operation on his spine, he was able to learn to, we'd plug in a radio, and he could learn to turn the radio on for beta and off for in alpha for either the advertisements or the music for either right or left hemisphere in either frequency. So when the word came out that the studies had been done saying that if you were more right brain or left brain because you had more beta on one side for one reason or another, I knew it was wrong, because we had obviously shown that it wasn't quite right. And then eventually, I designed one little sculpture feedback. Thank you very much. Thank you. So he gave me the second one, because my interest was always to hook up 2 people and have them practice alpha at the same time to help them try to do their telepathic communication. Well, I was invited to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York to show the light sculpture, and this settled my whole drive to have an exhibit in New York as the artist. And after that, I lost interest in that whole ego drive and devoted the equipment to research. So we'll have the first overhead. This, what happened to the color? Okay, this is the first biofeedback light sculpture. It took 8 layers of plexiglass, and I carved one by one all those little dots. Plexiglass carries light on the end, so it was easy to turn on and off with the brainwave machine. And the one up at the top is actually blue. It doesn't look like blue. And that's for both, if the side patterns would tell you which hemisphere it was coming from. So that was what it looked like when it was both in alpha. The next one down is green with more divisions, and that was right and left hemisphere for the beta. The one at the bottom shows beta on one side and theta on the other. The white one would what we used for eye blinks, and next one up is alpha on one side and theta on the other, and the top is alpha on the opposite side and beta on the other side. So you're hooked up and you're looking at this thing right from the middle, so it doesn't distract your vision. And if you're watching it and it does all this thing back and forth, we came to the conclusion, how I think is what I see. Focus defines reality. And so we had a lot of fun with it. So we played with it a lot. And but I very quickly found out that it wasn't good enough for telepathy. Simultaneous alpha just wasn't good enough. Two people could be doing very, very different things and producing alpha or beta or whatever else. They could be in the same frequency but not have anything to do with what they're thinking about. So one night, I had both sides on my own head, and I was listening to the warbling sounds, which would tell me the frequency, and I was adjusting one thing or another with all this equipment. And suddenly I realized I was moving into a very nice altered state. And then I became aware that both sides were exactly in the same rhythm, and they exactly in the same rhythm of Alaraka's tabla rhythm on a record playing in the background. And that meant they were in sync. And that's different than just simultaneous alpha on different frequencies. So at that point, I called up Tim and I said, "Gee, Tim, we really need a biofeedback sound for synchronization." And he built it and delivered it to me. And all of a sudden, we're no longer living in the folks' attic. I got a scholarship to work on the Ph.D. to do the research. I got a job teaching parapsychology at the junior college. I had 30 students suddenly volunteering to help me with the work. Found a small apartment near the college, and we're off and running. We're ready to go. And so that's what this study is about. It started in 1974. In 1973, to back up, I had showed the light sculpture to our dear friend and guru of this age, a physicist, a Sanskrit scholar, a teacher in every dimension, Dr. Dean Brown. And he took an interest in it. He introduced me to Russell and suggested that I help draw the pictures for Uri Geller, and so that's what got me into that project too. So Russell and David Hurt came up and set up a counter for me so that I'd have an on-off counter and we'd be able to count whether they were in sync or not. Before I go any further, I do want to show you the next one. Our equipment was very crude compared to what's possible now. And Steve Wall, there's something wrong with the color there for some reason. It's just not. Wash it out? Are you going to get any reds or anything? Anyway, Steve Wall in Biofeedback Research Institute, for people who want to really get high in biofeedback, has designed these wonderful, wonderful feedback visions and sounds. And he, with his little computer, which you can actually buy and take home if you've got that kind of money, and learn it yourself. But he will measure GSR, EMG, 2 channels of EEG, and heart rate simultaneously. Of course, you get feedback from just one or the other, but at the end of your session, he'll print out charts on everything. And what we did, which was the only toys in town at the time and we had to play with, was wonderful. But if you could compare that to a bicycle, what he's got is a supersonic jet. And I highly recommend anybody who is really interested in finding out more about their consciousness to go and see Steve Wall and try it out. He's in Cotati, California. I have a folder somewhere where I could give you the address afterwards if you're interested. Pardon? Wall, W-A-L-L. BRI, Biofeedback Research Institute in Cotati. It's near Santa Rosa. It's right down the street from Sonoma State. And he has been doing work, something that I observed some time ago when I had the instruments in the classroom, that you can train kids to increase their focus of attention, and he's using this much better for them, I would assume, than some of the chemistry that's given to them if it works. But he is working with ADD and ADHD kids to train them to use the brain in a more efficient way. Okay. So after our first study, we had 11 teams, And I insisted that couples, we only have 1 semester to do the first one before the kids get away. I made sure that the volunteers chose their partner with whom they had some rapport. We don't have time to, have them get acquainted on the brainwave machine. And so we did telepathy experiments first. I was hoping the training would help them learn. And according to Jeffrey this morning, we found out what he found out. Training didn't seem to help. But then we gave them sessions where they trained with a biofeedback to synchronize between right and left hemisphere. And then they trained with each other, either right to right or left or whatever they chose. And sure enough, what I discovered before is the top graph shows it's random. There's no relationship to their overall telepathy scores. Yeah, we tested them afterwards too. There's no relationship, it's random, between simultaneous alpha and telepathy. However, the overall phase coherence scores and the lower graph is significant. P is less than 0.01. And this was, this was enough. Even though their telepathy wasn't great, it was just a little above chance. But as you can see, if I can get this thing working. Oh, yes, here we go. Doesn't. Well, there we go. Team 4, most of the couples were male-female couples. Team 4, then hold still, is right up here at the top. They had 36%. Now, chance was chosen at 20% because they did 5 of these free response telepathy on 3x5 cards in a row. So, and they had to be matched by blind matching 1 in 5, so that made chance at 20. But these guys got 36%, and their synchronization was the best. And they were buddies from a long time. They weren't gay, they were buddies, but they were musicians. And the sense of having to hold a focus in music was something that was very easy for them. And this was a couple that were very happy with each other, and this couple eventually got married. Now, the folks down here, they're not only below chance, but they didn't really have a sense of what the synchronization was. Now, I have to say that we only had time for 3 training sessions. And almost everybody in biofeedback, just if you're producing alpha, would think that at least 10 are necessary. Well, we had 1 semester, we're all amateurs, what do we know? You know, we've got the toys, we try. And some people had a good sense of what alpha rhythms were, and some didn't to begin with. One couple just joined up for the experiment, and they didn't do very well in either one. Another couple, they started out pretty good, but towards the end, one of the last trials, he was put so much energy into sending it to her, and she didn't really get it. She got color and shape. And he got upset. Hi, why didn't you get my message? And the monitors would say, well, that's really not an appropriate attitude. We're not here to, we're just looking to see what happens. And the argument went on, and he was very controlling. And I get a call the next day saying, I don't want to synchronize my brainwaves with him ever again. So what I think, besides being able, that may or may not train you to do telepathy, but it's good for marriage counseling. Okay. So then later on, we got a small grant from the Institute of Noetic Sciences in 1980 to see chart recordings. Is this really going on or is it not going on? And so we've added now 5 teams. So in looking at the whole, these are older people. They've had meditation, they've studied Aikido. One was a spiritual healer. And let's see, the first teams are the black squares. These white squares are the other team. And again, it's totally random for simultaneous alpha and their telepathy scores. Now, even these guys had much better telepathy scores. Down here, the X's are when we try to do an experiment while they were hooked up to the EEG. And either the EEG was distracting to their telepathy or the telepathy was there's too much going on. And so that didn't exactly work. But this moved it up. You want to move it up a little bit, Elizabeth? This moved it up. And this time, because what we discovered is that the ratio between simultaneous and in phase was so much more important that we decided to do the statistics that way. And now P is less than 0.001. When we added in the ones where they were distracted by the electrodes, it moved it down to 0.002. It was still significant, but by itself, it wasn't that good. Now, what people would say is, there's another one up there, the next one. Okay, move it up a little to 1. This is what people would say. Okay, first of all, what does it take to turn the light on, or to turn on the sound? What does it take? How do you feel afterwards? And this is what some people said about interhemispheric sync in alpha. Now, I will have to say also that we set the frequency range not from 8 to 12, but from 7 to 13. And that was to include that Schumann resonance area if anybody got into the 7.8 cycles, because if they were on 8, it was right in between. It went on and off, and it was very distracting, so we included it. So this is both alpha and the upper edge of theta. Elmer Green has done a lot of work in theta and so on, and so this includes that upper level. So the one person says there's a centeredness literal to experience. Imagery is formed with a predominance of mandala pattern. Awareness is acute. Maybe if I put it over here, I can read these things better. Number 2, first time after, felt clear-headed all day. Number 3, when I'm in sync, I feel nice and relaxed. When I'd start registering on the sound too much, I'd go out of sync. I reminded myself to relax and would find my mind wandering. As long as I allowed my thoughts to flow, I seemed to remain in sync. When becoming aware of a thought I didn't like, I went out of sync. The nice thing about that, sometimes you're sitting in meditation and all of a sudden you're gone. You've wandered, you were talking to yourself about what happened yesterday, what are you going to do tomorrow? And it takes you a while to say, oh yes, that's not centered. But on the brainwave biofeedback, the tone turns off. As soon as you're no longer in that pure hum of the center, it's gone. Number 4, sustained focus in nonverbal sensuality. The tone is on when words are absent. As soon as I tell myself about it, the tone stops. Now, this is important because what it tells you, the observer and the observed are not the same even in your own head. That when you're in sync, you're kind of aware of it. But when you tell yourself about it, it's gone. And so we have this problem of the observer and the observed in almost any psychological research. Number 5, when in sync with myself, I have no thoughts in my head. The sync tone is very calming. I seem to blend with it, a very complete feeling. And number 6, sustained sync elicits a feeling of being grasped in a beam of cosmic rays. In a mobilization, an electric shock of energy like being center stage in a spotlight. And the other one, extremely calming and centering. So these were the kind of responses we got from people who enjoyed the experience, and they all did. Not only that, that when they would tell me years later, long after the machines are put away, oh, I remembered my alpha training, and I was in this tight situation, and I just took a deep breath and remembered what it felt like and went there, and it was very helpful. Okay. Now here is when we got chart recordings in 1980. This is the husband. His left, the top, I do have his light. This is his left occiput signal and his right occiput signal. And this is his wife, left and right. And they're just starting to practice. After they've practiced for a while, you can see, move it up a little. After they've practiced for a while, you can see they're coming together. They were very good at it. They were very good at the telepathy as well. Okay? Now, what they say, oh dear, I don't think you have, yeah, not yet. Not yet. What they say, I didn't get a slide. I tried to get a transparency of this, and they were very good to let me use the Xerox machine, and as soon as I put my transparency in, I jammed the machine, so I'm going to have to read this one to you. This is what this gentleman said about the experience. Intense focus at the heart level, and this is now paired synchronization. Afterwards, it seems that maybe we converse more, or is it our differing opinions don't clash as much? And here's another couple. The experiment has put us in a good place together, able to give each other our own space. I've gotten into paying more attention to my own various states. It's been really good for both of us. And one of the couples who did very well, touch. When we agreed on what we'd focus on, it was easier. When he rubbed my foot and kept the sensation moving from place to place, the tone stayed on longer. Our focuses kept following the same point of touch. Now this certainly implies what would lead to the study of Tantra. It's very much involved with that. And the couple, the two boys who were musicians, one of them said, absolute sync, where it is and how to get there. First, drain your mind. Then decide on a place to meet and be there. When we get together, it's like perfect communion, comfortable, just exceedingly nice. It's powerful and safe. When we open our eyes, we look at each other and say, yep, we just both got something far out. Okay. Yeah. Now, with those kind of statistics, we decided, and with the blind match looking like we didn't do that much telepathy, we looked at the telepathy in a very different way. We had another judge come in, and boy, that's really wiped out, isn't it? Gosh. Doesn't show up at all. Okay, well, we had them judged for similarities. What kind of similar? Shape, color, word, mood, and concept. Because all of your senses work. You know, Jeffrey talked this morning about ESP. ESP is not a very good term because it's not an extra sense. It's all of your senses. It's an extra way of looking at it. Now, even if you're bringing something in, to be conscious, it has to come through your sensory system. Otherwise, you don't know about it, basically, or you can't express it. So, bummer. It turns out, even if you can't see it, the 65 trials of the second team were better than the students in the first team, the 290 trials. But shape and color are the most dominant similarities that come through. Now, this is where, if you're amateurs like we all are in our study back then, shape comes in and you immediately goes into the visual association and you give it your association. I'm sending you a picture of a hat and you get a flying saucer. I mean, it's the same shape, it's the same color, but you give it something else, and you've seen that also in what you've been doing here today. The same colors. In this case, I gave everybody a packet of Pentels, 10 colors each, same colors. If they had two exactly the same colors, we didn't do the statistics on it. If they had a color, it was one. And similar exact words. If they named the word, we see a world spinning around, they said world, fine. They got a point for that. If they had descriptive words, and I'll show you some examples in a minute, similar moods, we had a list of 20 moods, happy, sad, angry, whatever. and a list of 20 concepts to choose from. So there's a lot of other statistics that might be able to be done on this set, but I'm not going to do it, and I'm not a statistician. Go ahead. Now, this is true even if we're talking to each other face to face. How do we communicate with each other when most of what we perceive is a reflection of what we project? Now, in telepathy, the nice thing about telepathy is it stretches that out so far you have a chance to see it. In ordinary conversation, it goes by so fast that you can assume what you're saying is what's real, and they can use the same words. And there are a lot of comedy routines on this one. I'm sure you've seen. And of course, they clue the audience in that each person is talking about something different. But in our own life, sometimes people get really irritated because of what somebody else said and isn't what they meant. And that happens a lot. Okay. But in telepathy, what you're sending and what you're receiving, you can just stretch it right out there. Okay, so sensory perception, I'm going to push it up a little bit first. The last two are examples of an absolute miss and an absolute hit. So I'll be talking about partials, and I want you to know how far out you can be. This is the same couple with the absolute miss there in the middle. But down here at the bottom, well, I have the scores, and these are all in the book too. The blind match, 0. Similarities match, 0. Down here, blind match, 4 out of 5. Similarities, 6, all 6 similarities. This is when he started to look at the entire set, there was only one response in 400 trials where the sender drew red zigzag lines at the top, the receiver gets red zigzag lines at the top, the circle is in the target, the circle for the face, for the mouth, and the idea that it's the main impression of a man in pain. What is interesting is it's the only one, I mean, we had a lot of concept similarities on, but it's the only one where the red zigzag line appears in 400 trials, and now we're looking at something very, very different in terms of the statistics. Okay. Oh, at the top, let me push it down a little bit. We had the artist, Jim Dallin, and he wasn't working in color because we were in a black and white video studio at the college. But these are the 10 that I've listed as sensory, even though we usually think of 5 senses. The sense of smell and taste. I started to do one with smell and taste, and I think that a very good research subject could be done with those as the main target, but I don't have them here. Sense of touch, sense of qual, the whole idea about it, the whole mood. Sense of empathy, where a person feels into the target. Sense of hearing, they hear a sound. Sense of concept, verbalization. Sense of sight. Sense of pairs and or opposites, and sense of resonance. Now, from our study of 400, I have examples of all of these. Oh my goodness, he's giving me the time. Okay, run through them really quickly. Here's a sense, push it down, a sense of touch. In this one, the touch shows up in the bottom, the back of the card, felt pressure in center forehead and saw that. And you can see in the enlargement there's something in the forehead, and they felt the pressure. Down here, the sense of qual, it's Nixon on a $3 bill from Mad Magazine. And we got 3 heads, 3 bodies, and something with a charge on it, morbid humor. Down here, the sense of empathy. Here's a guy looking into a cave from some comic book, and he says, I felt like I was at the top of a spiral staircase looking down. Just keep going, and because he's trying to wind me up here and we haven't even got off the track. There's a sense of verbalization when they mention word. Here in the bottom one, the receiver gets a better drawing of the hand than the sender does. and in the top, felt or heard sound of a barking animal. Go ahead. Sense of concept. There's the target is a statue, a very small statue from King Tut's tomb. See, these are all 3x5 cards. There were 100 cards in the target pool at the beginning of every session. And we had students cutting them out of everything, not just National Geographic, which was discussed this morning, but we had Playboy, we had comic books, we had National Geographic and Time and Life magazine and everything we could find because we needed 100, and that was, we ended up with 400. In this case, they get a person shooting others in the street of violence that they saw on TV last night, but the concept is there, and the sense of resonance. Most of the students, if there was a sexy picture, they had some kind of symbolism going with it, but this was the older group and they didn't have any trouble drawing sexy pictures at all. They had the resonance with each other on that plane. Go ahead. Now, of course, the most dominant one is a sense of sight. And the top one is the nuclear blast. The sender drew it as lines out like a sun instead of circular. The receiver gets a combination of both. It's sun energy going in and out of an eye. And you can tell all of the 5 blind matchers were able to match it. With the second one, there's 4 dots on the 4 dots around the neck and the horns and red eyes. He's got 4 dots, horns, red eyes, and the yellow. And here, we tried something with the 2 artists the sender only drew the head, well, I was a sender in this case, the beheading of John the Baptist, and both the receivers drew a head with something coming out of the top, but interpreted very differently. But the other thing is the angel up here is holding this banner, and it's at the same angle as this here. And the sword in the other part of the angel's hand is the same angle as that. Okay. Now, here's where I borrowed from the physicist the concept of the hyperspace. Saul Paul's diagram talks about the space-time body and the hyperspace body, and that there is a lifting into the hyperspace body, which it sort of feels like when you get out there, or that we are the hyperspace body, and this is our 3 space-time manifestations of the higher dimension, and that we inhabit it temporarily. Okay. Give me a couple of Jim and the purple one. Yeah, just a couple of those. He's back there doing this, and I'm... Okay, not that one. No, wrong one. Not the next one, the yellow one. I'm sorry, we were in the wrong place. That was dreamlike symbolism. We're going to skip all that. It's in the book anyway. Time for a commercial while she figures it out. My book is for sale out there. I hope you buy it so I don't have to take many home. But I will be leaving after the break at 3 o'clock. So that's the opportunity. You don't wait till after the session's over because I will take what I've got and go home. Now, the remote viewers I found in my classroom were these artists. They had been able to draw everything they've ever seen and had stacks of notebooks. They could draw anything they visualized. So whatever image came through their head, they could draw it. They didn't have to verbalize it. That's very important. If you see a green blob and you go, it's a green blob, if you have to call it a leaf, it takes on another concept. So one of the targets was the gazebo, and he draws this very elaborate pillar. In order to get to the gazebo, we had to go past the playground, and he gets a kid on this funny animal, and move it up a little. Down at the railroad track, they've turned that into marina right now, but at the time, he has us throwing frisbee at the railroad track. Go ahead. We'll just go through them fast. Before the experiment actually started, he started drawing, and I stopped at this place to pick up something from, someplace, the Loop Center, and you got upside down backwards. I mean, not upside down, but you got it. Just turn it over. Okay. I stopped and I got some application from this funny rickety file on a rickety table, and he draws it. Exactly. I'm in Hawaii, And we were doing a remote viewing from Hawaii, 3,000 miles away. He's in Santa Rosa. I said, okay, tune in between 5 and 6 o'clock your time or whatever, and draw what you see. Well, at the end, he did a whole session for this, so we don't have time to see it. But at the end of the session, we got back to where we were going, and this hungry cat ran into the refrigerator she had a bunch of kittens, to demand food. And I thought, well, this is irritating. But I took pictures of everything that happened, and he, back in Santa Rosa, draws a dog is begging for food, annoyances from a beta. But his dog looks a lot like my cat. Okay, go ahead. We'll skip some of that. We were at the waterfall. Greg Shelkin draws us a waterfall. He ends up and says Hana Bay, and we were there. And go ahead. There's too much to say about some of these things. We were at the cemetery, and it's the first time I had seen, this is back in the 70s, it's the first time I'd seen indoor-outdoor grass carpet used on a cemetery. And he draws the same square, cement square with a carpet in it, but he puts an illustration. And the truck, there was a truck there and a flag. Go ahead. And, okay, there's not enough time to talk about this one, but we went to South America to do, in 1975, to do an experiment between the Congress of Sorcery in Bogota, Colombia, and the AHP conference in Estes Park, Colorado, and the artist Jim Dallin was in Santa Rosa, and he had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to do it. He was expecting Uri Geller to be the receiver, but there was a lot of problems about that. But I met this little medicine man, very short guy, barefoot, homespun dress with his coca leaves in his bag, and I asked him if he would conduct the meditation, and he said yes. He had dreams that we were coming to establish a communication. So there's Jim at 3 o'clock in the morning, draws the medicine man. There was a little rain before it started, and they had used the I Ching as the randomly selected message. We didn't know anything about that. He draws the I Ching. He gives it to me. I come back. He says, gee, I don't know if I got anything. It just doesn't make any sense to me. For a year later, I didn't know what this deer meant. And it turns out that the Native Americans along that area used the deer spirit as the transmitter of messages. Okay, I guess we're through.
Thank you very much, Gene. That was a very interesting presentation. We probably can take 1 or 2 questions, and then if you have more to discuss, you can do that while she's signing your book that you buy from her.
Oh, goody.
Anybody that's just burning and dying to ask her a question? Okay, we got one here, and we got Russell. Shall we let Russell talk?
Sure, go ahead.
Oh, all right, okay.
He knows more about it anyway.
You have more experience with the brainwave synchronization than any of your passers-by. Could you tell us about your subjective experiences in brainwave synchronization with another person? What is that like for you?
Wonderful. We've looked at it under a variety of circumstances. As you know, I had it in my home for a long time, in my bedroom as well. It's very difficult to look at certain states of consciousness because you move around too much, you lose your electrodes, so I can't tell you about that. But sensuality is definitely one of the things that allows synchronization. I believe that in some cases where communication is taking place, there's a harmonic. That we wouldn't measure that, but there'll be, if you set up a holding pattern, and it doesn't have to be in alpha or even in beta, if you set up a holding pattern that isn't distracted with a lot of spikes and so on, you have an opportunity to establish a resonance with the other person. Now, for me, if I'm doing some healing work, I will try to sort of impose that from my own place. And I'll have to tell you another example of an experimenter effect, that when I was hooking other people up, and if I'm too busy with the machines, they might go out of sync. So I'd have to take a deep breath, go into sync myself without saying anything in order to allow them to reestablish it. Because the experimenter effect from that level is very powerful. And of course, you know, if somebody is offered $1 million or something, if somebody can be psychic, but it's so easy to distract and throw in those problems. So how you focus your mind is fundamental. Is that an answer enough for your question? Okay.
Who else had their hand up? Somebody back here in the back. Oh, okay, here you go.
Would you say that people automatically synchronize with their environment, the people in their environment? Like,
Oh.
let's say the people you work with, your neighbors? and
Let's
so
just say we live in a psychic soup. And you know, for the folks who go around and say that psychic activity doesn't happen, they need to wake up. We live in psychic soup. You're already affected. I mean, the energy of this conference has been wonderful. If you were all skeptics out there, you know, you'd be hooting and hollering and telling me to shut up, right? And if suppose you've got a meditation group and they're all sitting around and Mo's click, you know, and somebody walks in and they've lost their car keys, what happens? Everyone is affected, whether you want to be or not. When you want to focus your attention on your studies and somebody else has got an emotional disturbance, even if they don't say anything, you feel it. It's around you. All of those things, our energy fields around here. And we know what we feel when you walk into a certain room or you meet somebody. Those are things that are going on, and part of that's the EEG. Part of it is your GSR and, you know, the way your muscle tension and all the rest of those things, which can be measured.
So can you control it?
Of course. That's the fun part. Now, my soapbox, and this will be my last control of the stage here. For a long time, I tried to promote the idea of biofeedback in education. And the Biofeedback Society went for the medical model instead of the self-discovery model, I think long before they knew enough about it. And so those who were interested in education kind of lost out, and there was no money in that like there is in medical. But if we could teach and got an interest in teaching people biofeedback by 5th grade, and I've done this in 5th grade classes, you can teach intelligence. If you teach a 5th grade kids to learn to raise and lower their skin temperature, to have control as needed of their GSR, their EMG, and their brain waves, nobody can tell them they're really dumb to begin with. And for another reason, the whole healthcare problem in this country will be changed within 10 years.